hear well in the back?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, as the title says, I'm going to be talking about the lynching of Laura and L.D. Nelson and the origins of Oklahoma racial violence. And when I started this project, or this paper, I didn't know that I was going to be talking about the origins of Oklahoma racial violence. It just sort of happened like that. And as the title suggests, our story starts in Oklahoma, and specifically in this county right there. I'm not that tall, but it's Oklahoman County, and that's the only time I'm going to be saying that during the presentation because I can't really pronounce it that well. Now today, I checked the statistics today, the county has about a 12,000 residents population. That's about 19 people per square mile out of a 625 square mile radius, square miles in the county. But that wasn't always the case. In fact, in 1907, the year of Oklahoma statehood, it was actually much larger. In 1907, the population was actually around 15,600, and in just 3 years, that number rose to 20,000. So, you know, as historians, we look at that and we're like, okay, why did the population rise so dramatically in just 3 years? And you could say, and I just make the argument that Oklahoma became a state, it became more attractive, but also one more thing. The majority of the population in Oklahoma is white, about 19% Native American, 8% black, but at 40 or 60% white at this time, it was one of the least diverse areas in the region. Okay, so now I see this huge population boom from 1907, 1910. I'm wondering what's going on. So I start looking everywhere, and what I actually find is I start looking at census records and ancestry records. And what I find is that a lot of the people that are involved in this narrative come from Texas. This is something that I was pretty excited to find out, just because I looked at Laura Nelson's census records. She came from Texas. I looked at the jailer who was working at the time at the jail. He lived in Texas. He lived in Grayson County, Texas. Laura's from Boss County. It's right there in the center. Grayson's there at the top. There is the father of a popular American folk singer, Woody Guthrie. You might be familiar with him. He was actually from Boss County, and he was actually allegedly one of the members of the mob that eventually killed Laura and LD. And the final one, Lampasas, the photographer that took the photo of Laura and LD swinging underneath the bridge of the North Canadian River, actually hailed from Lampasas. So I see this huge trend that a lot of these people were coming from Texas, and they all pretty much migrated in the same decade, and the only exception to that would be the person from Lampasas, George Henry Farnham, which I don't have a census record for him for 1900, but I have it for 1890. So he migrated sometime between 1890 and 1910, but everybody else migrated between 1900 and 1910. Okay, now, in preparation for this next thing I'm going to be showing you, I just want to say that when I was preparing this presentation, I made this sort of as I don't want to say a joke, but just to show how ridiculous it is. This is the statistics for lynchings of African Americans by 1900 in Oklahoma and Texas. And as you can see, there is a huge variation. Blacks really aren't getting lynched in Oklahoma as much as they are in Texas. And in fact, in Texas, that number is probably higher because Texas is a big state. Not all the lynchings get reported. And in fact, in Oklahoma, there were 17 lynch victims, but in fact, or 17 black lynch victims, but in fact, there was actually 107 total. So the majority of the people that were getting lynched were actually white. And the story for why these people were getting lynched encapsulates the persona of stereotypical Southwestern America. They were highway robbers, they were cattle thieves, they were stealing stuff. So you don't really see, so prior to statehood, you do not see racial violence. You do not see white Southerners resorting to ultimate violence to protect white womanhood is the standard narrative we see. Okay. So I want to take a look at this. And I know this is a giant long text. I'm not going to be reading this, obviously, but this was the only primary source that I had to go on when I was doing my presentation, or the only primary source of someone who was actually there, who actually witnessed the lynching himself. And this actually comes from the jailer, William Lawrence Payne. And I've highlighted the top of it blue, just to show you how much. Now, the title of this is called Oklahoman's Night of Terror, and he wrote this approximately a little less than a month after the actual lynching itself. He wrote it in June of 1911. And the actual blue part is actually him just describing the lynching, and the rest of it is what happened afterwards. So when he's talking about Oklahoman's Night of Terror, this is what I expected. Oklahoman's Night of Terror, it was Laura and her son getting lynched, right? That is not what he's talking about. When he says Oklahoman's Night of Terror, he's actually talking about the black, which is the fear of race riots that took over the town after the lynching, because racial tensions after the lynching were at an all-time high. And you see a lot of this. The lawless Negroes of Ofusi County and adjoining counties. It's pretty clear to me that the mob that eventually grabbed Laura and L.D. Nelson in the jail, they probably didn't have to fight William Lawrence Payne that hard. Okay. Okay, now I'm going to take it to November 20th of 1906. And this is the beginning of the Oklahoma State National, or the Oklahoma Constitutional Convention, where they decided that, hey, we're going to become a state in the Union, we need a constitution, what are we going to do? And this man's name is, as you can see, is William H. Murray, and he would eventually become one of the governors of Oklahoma, but a lot later. It's not really relevant to this. And he was directly responsible for the implementation of Jim Crow into the Oklahoma State Constitution. And this has, of course, consequences. He implemented a clause within the Constitution that states that the public schooling has to be segregated. Okay. So the Constitution was finalized on April 19th, 1907. And on September 17th, 1907, a statewide vote was called to fill the House, the Senate, and the governor's seat. And this is who they voted for. And this is a Democrat. And they also claimed a Democratic majority in the House and the Senate. So, of course, if you're a Southern white, if you're a stereotypical white Southern Democrat in the United States at this time, you're pretty happy to see the kind of state that Oklahoma is becoming at this time. Now, Charles Haskell, man from the previous slide, served 4 years, and then he was replaced by this man right here, and his name is Lee Cruz, and he served as the governor for 4 years. Started in 1911. He took office in January. And the reason I bring this up, the reason I think that this man has particular influence in this story is because he hated the death penalty. And when historians talk about lynching, they often go to the lethal social control model of lynching, whereas people want to feel safe and they resort to violence to do so. So, if the people of Oklahoma knew that they had just elected a governor that wasn't going to satisfy their lust for bloody revenge, then isn't it possible that they just decided to take it up for themselves? And this is further proved by the fact that when you look at the lynchings after 1907, it is dramatic. You cannot make this stuff up. From 1907 to 1920, there were 33 recorded lynchings. Yes, I know, it's smaller than Texas. However, 23% of those were black. The majority of them again. And they weren't robbing cattle. They weren't highway thieves. They were just, it really does encapsulate what happens in the other southern states prior to this. Okay, now before I actually go into the actual lynching, I want to go into how the story was told to the nation. And here I have two newspaper articles that I've taken out. And here, the one on the left, we have women and son victim of lynchers. And there's a whole bunch there. And it says right there there'll be no investigation into the lynching of the Lauren Nevers and her 16-year-old son. A lot of this information is actually wrong when I was looking at it. One, there will be no official investigation. That's not true because they couldn't have known that because that was literally a day after lynching and the grand jury hadn't even convened yet. This one says that they were lynched in the Colorado River, which is like hundreds of miles west of Oklahoma. But really why I'm bringing these two articles up is because one of these is from Pennsylvania and one of these is from Texas. And I think I could see which one is from Texas and which one is from Pennsylvania. Mainly because this one, women and son victim of lynchers, and this is Negro woman and son lynched, fearful vengeance of Oklahoma mob. This one is trying to, you know, justify the lynching in some way. It's like, oh, the mob, they were scared, they were fearful of black encroachment, you know. And this is something that I just noticed just looking through the newspapers when I was doing this. Okay, so I'm going to go into what actually happened now that I've kind of led you up to the story of how Oklahoma became a state where this can happen. Sometime between May 1st and May 10th, a man named Claude Luttrell, who was living in Patton, Oklahoma, complains to the sheriff's department that someone had stolen his cow. Okay, so fine. This kind of has to do with cow robbery. And this is the complaint right here. This is authentic. And as you can see, the witnesses for the state, you have Claude Luttrell, and then you have Lawrence Payne, who is the jailer that was working at the county at the time. And so, acting on a hunch, this squirrely looking dude on the left here, George Looney is his name. He's sheriff's deputy. He goes over to the Nelson's house to investigate. And trying to get the date on this was very hard because nobody gave me the correct date. In fact, William Lawrence Payne, the jailer that was working at the county, I know I'm repeating myself, but I'm just making sure you're following, he gave a completely false story. He said that Laura and LD were lynched on the same day that Looney was shot, and it's completely wrong. He was shot 2 weeks before Laura and LD was lynched, and I know this. Okay, that's William Lawrence Payne. I know this because you can see here on May 11th, Austin Nelson is arrested, and he's sentenced to McAllister Prison in a move that eventually saved his life because Laura and LD would wait there until May 25th on the day that they were lynched. So I guess the fact that Austin Nelson actually did steal the cow actually saved his life because he was actually sentenced to a crime and wasn't actually stationed in the county at the time. Okay, so what happened? LD was castrated. Well, they were taken from the jail, and they were dragged 6 miles to the North Canyon River, and LD was castrated. They sort of have it censored here, and hung with his pants still around his ankles. Laura was raped, and then hung right next to her son. Now, the person that took these photos was this man that I've been mentioning a little bit before. His name is George Henry Farnham. And I can't really prove either way that George Henry Farnham was a racist, that he wanted to circulate photos to scare the black population in Oklahoma. Maybe he was just trying to make a quick buck, and he knew a quick way to, he knew a way to do it. But otherwise, he owned the only photo shop in Oklahoma, and that was that man, Farnham, and white. I find that pretty amusing, considering that randomly I found information online when I was doing this research that he was an adulterer. Okay, yes. Now, I want to go back to here because it says here there will be no official investigation into lynching. Now, that's not really true, although that's kind of true. It's not true because it's dated May 26, and there's no way that they could have known that. Because the district judge, John Carruthers, brought the grand jury together in June, a couple days later, and said, hey, can we do anything about this? Everybody's like, hey, we don't know who did it, and that's sort of just how the story ends. It's very anticlimactic, so I'm sorry, but there is no justice is ever served, and this is eventually what happens out of it. So, thank you for your time.